The slam of the front door echoed like a gunshot through the old Chicago house as my father turned his back on me. "Get out, Theo. I didn't raise a son to throw away our family name on some perversion," he snarled, his voice thick with the kind of disappointment that cuts deeper than any knife. I stood frozen on the porch, suitcase in hand, the autumn wind whipping through the oak trees that had shaded my childhood games. Lucas waited in the rental car at the curb, his face pale under the streetlight, but he didn't honk or call out. He knew this moment had been coming for years, and now it had finally shattered everything. I was 27, an architect with a decent job in San Francisco, and I had driven all the way to Illinois thinking honesty might finally bridge the gap between the man my father wanted and the man I actually was. Instead, the truth had blown the bridge to pieces. "You're no son of mine if you choose that lifestyle," he had roared over the dinner table after I introduced Lucas as more than a colleague. My mother had clutched her napkin, silent tears streaming, while my younger sister stared at her plate. The roast beef grew cold as my father listed every expectation I had failed: marriage to a nice girl, grandchildren to carry the Harlan name, a real heir to take over the family construction firm that had built half the suburbs around Chicago. "I won't have some fairy ruining what I built," he added, and those words landed like bricks. I didn't argue. I simply picked up the bag I had barely unpacked and walked out. Lucas started the engine the second I slid into the passenger seat. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his hand finding mine on the console. I wasn't. The highway stretched dark and endless ahead of us, and every mile felt like another nail in the coffin of the life I had tried so hard to keep balanced between two worlds. By the time we crossed into Indiana, the shock had settled into a dull ache behind my ribs. I kept replaying the scene, wondering if there had been a gentler way to say it, a better moment, a different version of me that could have made him proud. We stopped at a motel outside Indianapolis just before midnight. The room smelled of stale smoke and cheap coffee, but Lucas didn't complain. He ordered pizza we barely touched and sat beside me on the lumpy bed, letting me talk until my voice gave out. "He'll come around," he said, though we both knew it was more hope than fact. I wanted to believe him. Lucas had grown up in a quiet Portland family that had accepted him the day he came out at 16. His parents still sent us Christmas cards with both our names. Mine had just erased me from the family photo in one brutal sentence. The next morning we drove west again, the flat Midwest giving way to rolling hills. I called my mother from a rest stop in Missouri. She whispered that Dad had locked himself in his study and refused to speak to anyone. "He loves you, Theo. He just doesn't know how to love this version." Her words were meant to comfort, but they only sharpened the blade. By the time we reached the California state line 3 days later, exhaustion had numbed me enough to function. Lucas's apartment in the Mission District felt like a sanctuary and a prison at the same time. I unpacked my clothes into the closet we already shared, hung my drafting tools on the wall, and tried to pretend the hole in my chest wasn't growing larger every hour. Work offered a fragile distraction. The firm had just landed a waterfront redevelopment project, and my designs were due in 2 weeks. I buried myself in CAD drawings and client meetings, smiling through the exhaustion. Lucas taught history at a local high school and came home each afternoon with stories about his students that made me laugh despite everything. On weekends, we walked along the Embarcadero, watching the fog roll in over the bay, and for a few hours the world felt almost normal. But at night the doubts crept back. Was I selfish for choosing love over family? Had I destroyed my mother's peace for my own happiness? The questions circled like gulls over the water, never landing, never leaving. Then the first letter arrived. My sister slipped it into an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single page in my father's cramped handwriting. "If you ever want to be part of this family again, you know what you need to do. A real man provides heirs, not excuses." I read it 3 times before tearing it into confetti and flushing it down the toilet. Lucas found me staring at the ceiling that night and simply held me until morning. He never pushed, never asked me to choose. That quiet loyalty was the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. Weeks turned into months. Thanksgiving came and went without a single call from Chicago. I spent the holiday volunteering at a shelter with Lucas, serving turkey to people who had nowhere else to go. Their gratitude felt honest in a way my father's pride never had. Christmas was harder. My mother sent a small package containing the ornament I had made in 3rd grade, a lopsided clay star with my name scratched on the back. No note, just the ornament and a silent plea. I hung it on our tiny tree and cried in the shower so Lucas wouldn't hear. By January, the ache had hardened into something sharper, more determined. I started seeing a therapist recommended by Lucas's colleague, a kind woman named Dr. Rivera, who helped me untangle the knot of shame and anger. "Your father's rejection is about him, not you," she said during our 2nd session. I wanted to believe her, but the little boy inside me still waited for the apology that never came. Lucas never wavered. He cooked my favorite pasta on bad days and listened without judgment when I raged about the unfairness of it all. His steady presence was the anchor I hadn't known I needed until the storm hit. Then, in early February, my phone rang at 2 in the morning. The number was my mother's. "Theo, it's Dad. He's in the hospital. Heart attack." "They're not sure," her voice broke. I was on a plane to Chicago by sunrise, Lucas beside me the entire way, holding my hand through turbulence and silence. I didn't know what I would say when I saw my father. I only knew I had to go. The man who had thrown me out was still my father, and that truth refused to die no matter how hard I tried to bury it. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and regret. I stood outside the ICU wearing the same hoodie I had traveled in, heart hammering against my ribs while nurses hurried past. My mother rose from the plastic chair when she saw me, her eyes red-rimmed but relieved. She pulled me into a hug that felt both familiar and fragile. "He's stable now, but the doctor said another episode could." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. My sister sat a few feet away, scrolling her phone to avoid my gaze. The family had fractured along invisible lines, and I was the crack they all blamed. Lucas waited in the cafeteria, giving me space he knew I needed. I appreciated that more than he would ever understand. When the doctor finally allowed visitors, I stepped into the dim room alone. My father looked smaller than I remembered, tubes snaking across his chest, monitors beeping a steady rhythm. His eyes opened when I approached, and for a moment something like recognition flickered there before hardening into the same wall I had seen on the porch months earlier. "What are you doing here?" he rasped, voice weak but still edged with steel. "I came because Mom called." I kept my tone neutral, hands shoved deep in my pockets so he wouldn't see them shake. "She said you asked for me." That was a lie, but I needed to test the waters. He turned his face toward the window, jaw tight. "I don't need pity from someone who chose that life over his own blood." The words stung, but they also lit a fuse I hadn't known was still burning. I sat in the chair beside the bed and spoke the truth I had practiced on the plane. "I didn't choose to be gay, Dad. I chose to stop lying about it. You're the one who decided that made me worthless." He didn't answer. The silence stretched until a nurse came to check his vitals. I left the room before he could dismiss me again. Outside, Lucas met me with coffee and quiet understanding. We walked the sterile corridors while I vented every frustration I had swallowed for years. He listened, then said simply, "You showed up. That's more than he deserves right now." His words grounded me. That night we checked into a nearby hotel, and I fell asleep with Lucas's arm around my waist, the first real rest I had managed in weeks. The next morning my sister cornered me in the waiting room. "He's been different since you left," she whispered. "Angrier. Mom says he stares at old photos for hours." I didn't know what to do with that information. Part of me wanted to believe it meant he missed me. The rest remembered the door slamming shut. I spent the day fielding work emails on my laptop in the corner, sketching revisions for the San Francisco project between updates on my father's condition. Lucas sat beside me, grading papers and occasionally squeezing my knee in silent support. His presence turned the hospital from a battlefield into something almost bearable. On the 3rd day, the cardiologist called the family together. "We need to discuss long-term care. Mr. Harlan's heart is damaged, and stress is the biggest risk factor." My mother looked at me with pleading eyes. I knew what she wanted. I knew what my father would hate. That afternoon, I went back into his room alone. He was sitting up, color slightly better. "You still here?" he muttered. I pulled up the chair. "I'm not leaving until we talk like adults." "You want a real heir? Fine. Tell me what that actually means to you, because I'm done guessing." He stared at me for a long minute, then surprised me by answering. "It means continuity. The company. The name. Grandkids to carry it on. Not whatever this is." His gesture took in the empty space where a wife and children should have been. I leaned forward. The company is already struggling, Dad. I've seen the public filings. My designs could help modernize it, bring in younger clients. Lucas has connections in education that could open community projects. We're not the enemy. Your pride is. He didn't respond, but he didn't tell me to leave either. Small victories. That evening, Lucas and I walked along the frozen lakefront, breath visible in the February air. I'm proud of you, he said, stopping under a street lamp. The light caught the gold flecks in his eyes, and for the first time in months, I felt something warm bloom in my chest. We kissed there, soft and unhurried, the kind of kiss that reminded me why I had risked everything. Back at the hotel, I slept without nightmares for the first time since the disownment. The breakthrough came on day 5. My mother brought an old photo album to the hospital. Inside were pictures of my Uncle Daniel, Dad's younger brother who had died when I was 10. I had vague memories of him, tall, funny, always sketching buildings on napkins. Your father never talks about him, Mom said quietly while Dad slept. Daniel was gay. They fought the same way. Daniel left and never came back. Car accident 2 years later. The revelation hit like a second heart attack. Suddenly, my father's rage made a terrible kind of sense. He wasn't just rejecting me. He was rejecting the ghost of his own failure. I waited until the room was quiet. I know about Uncle Daniel, I said softly. My father's eyes flew open. For the first time I saw fear there, raw and unguarded. He didn't have to die alone, I continued. Neither do you. Tears welled in his eyes, and he looked away. I didn't push. I simply sat with him in the heavy silence, letting the truth settle between us like dust after a demolition. When visiting hours ended, he spoke 3 words that cracked the foundation I thought was unbreakable. Stay a while. The days blurred into a careful rhythm of hospital visits and tentative conversations. My father never apologized outright, but he stopped issuing ultimatums. Instead, he asked questions, halting and awkward, about my work in San Francisco, about the projects I was designing. I showed him sketches on my tablet, explaining sustainable materials and community spaces. For the first time in decades, he listened without interrupting. Lucas joined us one afternoon, bringing coffee and a quiet demeanor that somehow eased the tension. Dad eyed him for a long minute before nodding once, the closest thing to acceptance I had seen. At night, Lucas and I talked in the hotel room about the future. We don't have to stay forever, he reminded me. But maybe we don't have to run either. I agreed. The company my father had poured his life into was indeed struggling, and my modern designs could breathe new life into it if he would let me help remotely. I started drafting proposals between blood pressure checks and physical therapy sessions. My sister noticed the shift first. He smiles now when you leave, she texted one evening. Small cracks of light were appearing in the wall we had all thought permanent. Then the misunderstanding hit like a freight train. A former colleague from Chicago, someone I had worked with years ago, called my father's hospital room looking for me. The nurse patched the call through without thinking. The colleague mentioned Lucas's name in passing, joking about that cute history teacher who stole Theo away. Dad overheard everything. When I arrived the next morning, he was sitting up, face flushed with anger. So he's the reason you threw everything away? Some teacher who turned you. The accusation landed hard. I tried to explain that Lucas had nothing to do with my orientation, that I had known since high school, but the damage was done. Dad clammed up, refusing to look at me for 2 full days. Lucas took the blame without hesitation. Let him think what he needs to right now, he said when I vented in the parking lot. The truth will come out when he's ready. I hated that Lucas had to absorb the fallout of my father's ignorance. That night, I drove to the old family house alone. My mother let me in, and we sat at the kitchen table where the original explosion had happened. She showed me letters Uncle Daniel had written before he died, letters my father had hidden for years. In them, Daniel begged for understanding, described the loneliness of being disowned. Reading them felt like reading my own future if I let pride win again. I left copies on my father's hospital tray the next morning. He read them while I waited in the hallway. When I finally entered, his eyes were wet. I thought I was protecting you, he whispered. From what happened to him. The admission wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing I had ever received. We talked for hours that afternoon, awkward and halting, about fear and love and the things parents get wrong. Lucas waited patiently downstairs, and when I brought him up later, Dad managed a gruff, "Thank you for coming." It wasn't much, but it was everything. Work called me back to San Francisco the following week. The waterfront project had hit a snag, and my presence was required. I promised my father daily video calls and left with a strange mix of relief and longing. Lucas flew home with me, and the moment we stepped into our apartment, the weight of the past months lifted slightly. I threw myself into the redesign, incorporating ideas I had discussed with Dad. He actually responded to the first set of drawings with a single text, "Not bad." Coming from him, it felt like a standing ovation. Spring arrived early in California. Lucas and I spent weekends hiking in Marin, talking about the future without the shadow of Chicago looming quite so large. We discussed maybe adopting one day, building a life that didn't need anyone's approval to be valid. The conversations felt light and hopeful for the first time in ages. Then the second letter arrived, this one from my father's lawyer. It contained a formal offer, a minority stake in the company if I would consult on modernization. No conditions about my personal life. Just a business proposal signed in my father's shaky handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before showing Lucas. "He's trying," Lucas said simply, in the only language he knows. I accepted the consulting role on the condition that I worked remotely. Video calls with Dad became weekly fixtures. We argued over budgets and timelines the way fathers and sons are supposed to, without the added weight of shame. My mother sent photos of the garden she was planting, and my sister started texting me memes again. The family wasn't healed, but it was stitching itself back together in small, careful threads. Summer brought the first real test. The company landed a major bid for a community center in the suburbs, and Dad insisted I fly in to present my concepts in person. I arrived nervous but determined, Lucas beside me as moral support. The boardroom felt smaller than I remembered. Dad sat at the head of the table, still frail but upright. I walked through the slides, explaining inclusive design features and sustainable practices. When I finished, silence hung for a moment. Then Dad cleared his throat. "My son knows what he's talking about," he said. The simple pronoun carried more weight than any speech. Board members nodded. The project was approved on the spot. That evening, Dad invited us to the house for dinner. My mother had made lasagna, the same recipe from my childhood. We ate without grand declarations, just ordinary conversation about baseball and traffic and the price of lumber. Lucas fit seamlessly, asking Dad about old construction stories and laughing at the punchlines. When we left, Dad shook Lucas's hand at the door. "Drive safe," he said. 2 words that felt like a treaty. Back in San Francisco, the momentum carried us forward. I balanced consulting for the Chicago firm with my local projects, and the dual responsibilities kept me sharp. Lucas finished the school year and surprised me with a weekend trip to Yosemite. We hiked to the top of Sentinel Dome at sunset. The valley spread out below us like a painting. "I'm proud of the man you're becoming," he said as the sky turned pink. I kissed him there with the wind in our hair, feeling for the first time that I was exactly where I belonged. The piece was short-lived. A tabloid-style local blog in Chicago caught wind of the story somehow, publishing a sensational piece titled, "Heir Lives Double Life." The article twisted facts, suggesting I had hidden my relationship to manipulate the family business. Comments flooded in, some vicious, some supportive. My father called at midnight, voice tight with fury. "They're dragging our name through the mud because of your choices." For a moment, I felt the old shame rise, but I pushed it down. "Or because you spent years pretending I didn't exist," I countered. The line went quiet. Then he sighed. "Maybe we both have things to answer for." We decided to face it together. Lucas and I flew to Chicago the next weekend. Dad had called a family meeting at the house. My sister brought her boyfriend, a quiet accountant who seemed unfazed by the drama. Mom set out coffee and cookies like it was any Sunday afternoon. Dad stood at the head of the table and did something I never expected. He read a short statement he had written himself. "My son Theo is gay. He is also one of the most talented architects I know. The company will move forward with his ideas, and anyone who has a problem with that can find another job." He looked directly at me. "I was wrong to make you choose. I won't make that mistake again." Tears stung my eyes. Lucas reached under the table and squeezed my knee. The meeting ended with awkward hugs and promises to do better. Later that night, Dad and I sat on the back porch where I had learned to ride a bike. Fireflies blinked in the yard. "Daniel would have liked you," he said quietly. I wish I had told him that before he left. The confession hung between us, heavy but honest. I told him about the nights I had almost given up, about Lucas's unwavering support. Dad listened without interrupting, then nodded once. "He seems like a good man. Bring him around more." The following months were a masterclass in rebuilding. I redesigned the company logo to reflect a more modern image. Lucas started a history club at the local Chicago high school during summer break, and my father actually attended one of the open houses. Watching them discuss the Great Fire of 1871 felt surreal and wonderful. My mother bloomed in the new atmosphere, hosting small dinners where laughter came easier. The family business turned its first profit in 2 years, largely due to the community center project that had my fingerprints all over it. Yet growth is never linear. An old high school friend who had once been my closest confidant before I moved west resurfaced on social media with passive-aggressive comments about selling out to family pressure. The betrayal stung more than I expected. I had trusted him with my secret years ago, and now he was using it for clicks. Lucas helped me draft a calm response that shut the conversation down without drama. "Not everyone gets to come along on the journey," he reminded me. The word stayed with me. Autumn arrived with crisp air and new beginnings. Lucas proposed on a foggy morning at the Golden Gate Bridge. Nothing flashy, just a simple titanium band and the words, "I want every version of our life together." I said yes before he finished the sentence. We called my parents that same afternoon. Dad's voice cracked when he congratulated us. "Bring him home for Thanksgiving," he said. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. The wedding planning began quietly. We chose a small venue in San Francisco with a view of the bay, close friends, and the family members who had earned their place at the table. My sister designed the invitations. My mother offered to make her famous cheesecake. Dad insisted on paying for the flowers, a gesture that meant more than money. Through it all, Lucas remained my calm center, reminding me daily that we had already survived the hardest part. Winter brought the final pieces into place. The Chicago firm completed the community center ahead of schedule, and the ribbon-cutting ceremony became a quiet family affair. I stood beside my father as the mayor praised the innovative design. When the applause died down, Dad turned to me and said, "You did good, son," for words that rewrote years of silence. Lucas filmed the moment from the crowd, his smile brighter than the winter sun. We decided to split our time between cities, keeping the San Francisco apartment as our primary home while maintaining a small place in Chicago for visits. The arrangement worked better than expected. Dad's health stabilized with medication and reduced stress. He even started walking the dog my sister adopted, a golden retriever named after Uncle Daniel. The small changes accumulated into something solid and real. Then came the moment that tested everything again. Lucas received a job offer in Chicago, a prestigious position at a private academy with better pay and benefits. He turned it down without hesitation, but I saw the longing in his eyes. That night, I asked him the question I had been avoiding. "Would you be happy if we moved back?" He thought for a long time. "I'm happy wherever we're together. But I know you miss them more than you admit." We talked until sunrise, weighing pros and cons like the adults we had become. In the end, we compromised. Lucas would take a 1-year contract in Chicago while I continued remote work and occasional travel. The decision felt right. We packed the essentials and drove east again, this time with a moving truck and a sense of possibility instead of dread. The Chicago house my parents offered us as a temporary base felt different now. The walls no longer echoed with old arguments. Mom helped us arrange furniture while Dad grumbled about the fancy coffee machine Lucas insisted on bringing. Evenings filled with card games and stories. My father asked Lucas about his teaching methods, genuinely interested. I watched them from the kitchen doorway and felt the last jagged piece of my heart click into place. Spring returned, and with it our wedding. The ceremony was simple and perfect. My father walked me down the aisle, his hand steady on my arm. When the officiant asked who gave this man in marriage, Dad answered clearly, "His mother and I do." Lucas's parents flew in from Portland, beaming with pride. Vows were exchanged under a canopy of cherry blossoms, And when I kissed my husband, the applause felt like the whole world celebrating. At the reception, Dad raised a toast. To my son and his husband. May your life be longer and happier than I ever allowed myself to imagine. Tears flowed freely, mine included. The honeymoon was 2 weeks in Hawaii, just the two of us. We hiked volcanoes and swam with sea turtles, talking about the future we wanted to build. Adoption paperwork waited on the kitchen counter back home, but we weren't in a rush. For now, we simply enjoyed being married without secrets or shame. Life settled into a rhythm that felt both new and deeply familiar. Lucas thrived at the academy, and I split my time between Chicago projects and San Francisco clients via video. Dad's company expanded, and he started mentoring young architects who reminded him of me. Family dinners became monthly traditions, loud and imperfect and wonderful. My mother baked pies while Dad and Lucas debated baseball statistics. I sat back and marveled at how far we had come. One crisp October evening, we gathered at the house for my father's birthday. He was 70 now, slower but no less stubborn. After cake, he pulled me aside on the same porch where everything had once fallen apart. I was a fool for a long time, he said quietly. But I'm grateful you gave me another chance. I hugged him then, the kind of hug that erases years of distance. We're both here now, I answered. That's what matters. Lucas joined us a moment later, slipping his hand into mine. The three of us stood watching fireflies dance over the lawn, the same yard where I had once hidden my true self. Dad cleared his throat. I'm proud of the family we've become. The words landed soft and true. Later that night, lying in bed with Lucas, I realized the journey had never been about changing my father. It had been about becoming the man I was always meant to be and giving him the chance to love that man. The years that followed brought more milestones. We adopted a little boy named Elias, whose laughter filled every room. Dad taught him to build block towers while Lucas read him history books. My mother sewed quilts, and my sister became the cool aunt. The company thrived under our combined vision, and the community center we had designed together won national awards. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, built on honesty, forgiveness, and the kind of love that survives storms. Looking back, I sometimes wonder how different everything might have been if I had stayed silent. But silence had never been an option, not really. The truth had set us all free, even when it hurt. True or false? A parent's love should always come before societal expectations?